friends, my name is Emily and welcome back to my channel. I don't know if it's showing up on camera, but Adventures in Veganism might have a slight soy allergy. Skin looked fine. Treated myself to a soy latte and then I drank it and my skin got itchy and just did its own special thing. So we're not going at it with makeup or anything. It's just gonna be angry and I'm gonna leave it like that. If you are vegan and somehow managed to avoid soy, let me know in the comments down below. This is a July reading wrap up. We are back to the unreasonably long mini book reviews. I DNF'd Sugar Rush by Julie Burchhill. This is a piece of queer YA fiction that I picked up during June, which I had a Pride-themed TBR. Warning, explicit content is on the front here, and I never found out what that was because it is very much of its time and place. So this is like early 2000s, and it is set in the UK, and it is just riddled with slang. I mean, I watch a lot of YouTube. I'm familiar with a lot of UK slang, and the ones that I'm not, you can usually sort of guess from context, but some of this slang was just so dated that it was hard to get into, and I had to put it down. I had to DNF it. So I will never find out what was explicit. I suspect that because this was early 2000s, it was the lesbians. That was the explicit part. I then finished Harry Potter and The Order of the Phoenix. I don't really think I'm gonna go into this, otherwise this video will be long, but this is the one where Harry has PTSD and all of the adult figures in his life are dead or ignoring him. Good adulting, adults. The next book I read for a book club, this was my pick for the book club, and it was absolutely atrocious. I don't think anyone enjoyed it, but it has sparked the next book club's read. This is Pulp. It is YA fiction. It is split over two time periods, I believe 1955 and 2017. The point of view in 1955, so interesting. I wish the whole novel could be from that perspective. 2017 is like an SJW checklist. As somebody who identifies as an SJW, I take on that label that people on the internet like to throw at me, but this also felt like a checklist to me. Like, there is a non-binary character, there's a black character, there's a Korean character, there's a gay character, there's a lesbian character. Like, just check, 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 check. We hit all those boxes. Look at how much representation we have. And yet, 2017, Trump is elected. They make note of the fact that Trump is elected, and this is not a glorious, happy time for queer folks in America, and yet the contrast that the book seems to be giving us is like, look how dumb and regressive the 50s are, look how awesome 2017 is. No, it's really not, and I think that's a huge failure. The only fruitful thing that's come out of it is our further reading. After Pulp, I read Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. Once again, there's not a lot to say here other than I really wish that we'd maybe been able to explore more of Malfoy's perspectives. I think this is one of the few books where I really do wish that Harry Potter was a multi-POV series, because I think it could have been really interesting to flesh out Malfoy and see sort of beyond, because I feel like often the series positions people as black and white, as evil and good, and there isn't a lot of gray space in the series. So I wish that we'd been able to see more from Malfoy's perspective just to flesh him out. And I'm sure he's questioning quite a bit as like a student who's recently been indoctrinated and like is being asked to do really shitty things, right? I read Wordslut, A Feminist Guide to Taking Back the English Language by Amanda Montell. This is just linguistic nerdiness at its finest. It is looking at the ways in which our power structures are baked into our language and how bias and power are subconsciously working through our day-to-day speech. Like the difference between a boss or a CEO, the ways in which women in positions of power are cutesified as a girl boss or a CEO, it makes it so that the default of that position is male. Automatically, when we say CEO, we think man, and when we say boss, we think man. That's just one of the examples, but like so many things about language and power and gender was absolutely fascinating. The next book I read was Anthem by Ayn Rand. This is a really weird dystopian novel. Like, if we want to just take it at face value, Equality 72521 is in this like extremely communist society where, to the point that like singular pronouns have been eliminated, equality thinks in terms of we and us, and like jobs are assigned and you're not allowed to have any sort of preference. And so he is really smart, and he struggles with conforming to society. He has this secret desire to be a scholar, and he gets assigned to be a street cleaner. Things sort of go from there. As a dystopian novel, it's great. As a working through of Ayn Rand's politics, on the one hand, I'm like, okay, I totally get this. On the other, I'm like, you're absolutely bonkers. I read this for the podcast that I co-host with my friend Bailey, Wild Sound Civilized. Links to the podcast are in the description box down below. This episode should be dropping on August 25th. In addition to reading Anthem, we also looked at 2112 by Rush. It was a really fun episode to read for. Keep an eye out for that episode. The next book that I finished was the book that my patrons voted on for July, and that is Irma Voth by Miriam Toews. Miriam Toews is one of my favorite Canadian authors. She is a Mennonite, and she has experienced a lot of trauma in her life, and her work explores both. So this is the story of Irma Voth. So she is a Mennonite living in a colony in Mexico. She was born in Canada, and her father like one day randomly decides to move them to Mexico, seemingly for shits and giggles. Irma impulsively marries a Mexican, so not only was this marriage not approved by her family, like they elope for this marriage, she has married a non-Mennonite, and so her father disowns her. At the same time, a Mexican film crew has come in, and they are filming a movie about Mennonites, and so they've brought in a Russian Mennonite who doesn't speak Spanish, and they bring in one of the local Mennonites who does speak Spanish and Deutsch. It's like a low German. The director brings Irma on as a translator. So the director's script is about this really loving, emotional relationship between two Mennonites and like exploring this, and the lines that Miriam is giving the wife to say back to the husband are super critical of the Mennonite natural order of things, and like the wife being subservient to the husband, the woman being like lesser in this community. The director's like, we'll just put subtitles of my script on the screen, like nobody speaks this language, so nobody's gonna know even what's being said, and like that's part of the point. And so I think it's really interesting that there is a deliberate rewriting, a deliberate action happening. I haven't quite figured out what I want to do with this yet because I do have to review it for my patrons. I'm still sort of working through those ideas, but I really enjoyed Irma Voth, and if you haven't checked out Miriam Toews, I would highly recommend her work. The next book that I finished is The Hormone Diaries by Hannah Witton. Hannah Witton is a UK YouTuber who focuses on sex and relationships, and this is her book on periods. I picked it up more because I wanted to support Witton as a young creator, a young business person. I feel like I'm fairly well educated, not through the school system, obviously, because the curriculum that I was taught in high school was, I believe, the 1992 curriculum that was just garbage. A lot of the stuff that I have learned is through like outside research. So there was nothing really that surprised me. As you can see from the amount of sticky notes, there wasn't a lot of new information. I feel like so many of the things that this book points out is the absolutely gaping holes in our knowledge. This is something that is true of a lot of science. Women's hormones are considered to like mess with trials. So like they don't test things on women. They treat men's body as the default body, the good body for good results. There are so many unanswered questions. You can see it reflected in Witton's own research. She'll try and answer a question, and in her research will hit that just gap in knowledge because Science isn't interested in women's bodies. Science isn't interested in women's sexuality. The next book that I read is Release, a novel by Patrick Ness. This I had really high hopes for because it showed up on somebody, I believe Sana's queer YA recommendations, for June during Pride Month. She said it was a fantasy, and I was like, oh, queer fantasy, great. It is a queer fantasy in the loose sense. So the main story is about Adam, who is gay and part of an incredibly conservative Christian family. His father is a minister. They're all about appearance over action. Like, they have to appear like they are doing well, even though the church pays them peanuts. Like, his family all suspects that he's gay, knows that he's gay, but they won't talk about it. He doesn't bring it up. But when it does come up with his brother's like, you just gotta pray harder. You'll grow out of it if you pray harder. And so at the same time that Patrick is dealing with his family, dealing with his feelings for his boyfriend and his first love, interspersed between that is this bonkers, out of place fantasy thing about this spirit who has like the ghost of a deceased meth addict attached to her, and there's a fawn, and the deceased meth addict has some unfinished business with her boyfriend who murdered her while they were both strung out on meth. I could see if the fantasy narrative sort of paralleled Adam's narrative, and you could juxtapose the two and get some deeper meaning out of each one, that it would work, but it doesn't. It's just two separate narratives about a girl who died at the lake while strung out on meth, and about Adam who is going to a going away party at the same lake where this girl died, and that is the only connection, that they're from the same town and they are going to the same place, or they were in the same place, or will be in the same place, whatever. I have super mixed feelings. If you want a really great queer YA novel that you have to skip like small sections of, you could actually just take out all of the italicized bits of this book, which are the quote-unquote fantasy bits, and like, it would be a great story. Like, I would probably put it up there with Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda. I read Skip by Molly Mendoza. This is an absolutely gorgeous graphic novel that is well and truly bizarre. It is about a post-apocalyptic world, and this little person is alone and isolated on an island with their caregiver, and then they get radioed for help, and the caregiver's like, okay, you have to stay here and take care of the island. I'm gonna go to the mainland and help out because that's a good thing to do. And so they row away in their canoe, and the little person waits and waits and waits and waits, and they're like, no, she's never coming back. And so they take this locket that the person gave them to take care of until they come back, and they throw it in the water, and the minute they do it, they regret it. And so they dive in the water after this locket and fall into another world. And then they meet this guy who's a bit of a twit. He destroys things. Gloopy. They meet Gloopy, this like thing that looks like Cousin It, in the mushroom world, the little plant world, and Gloopy isn't good at being part of a community. The Amazon guy just looked straight into my bedroom as I was holding up this book, and we made incredibly awkward eye contact, and now I have to go answer the door. I have no idea where I was before the driver came. I'm glad I borrowed this from work opposed to purchasing it. The art is beautiful. The story was weirdly childish. The last thing that I read was The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina by Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa and Robert Hack. I love the television show, and I was curious about the comics. There's a whole introduction at the beginning of this comic about how he wanted to do the spin-off from his Darker Archie series, and like he decided to use this one artist whose work he thinks is really great, and then he got the artist to do the coloring, and like he thinks that they produced like the most gorgeous book published today. I don't find this particularly attractive art. Like, I am somebody who, I guess, really enjoys art, and it's not that it's like dark. Like, I'm just not a fan of The color palette, I think the show's color palette is more appealing. I'm not a fan of the sort of more sketchy illustration style. This really wasn't for me. I guess the graphic novels for me are more about the aesthetic of the images working with the dialogue, because at the end of the day, if you don't like the images and the color palette and like what you're being fed visually, you're just reading dialogue, and I may as well read a screenplay. Or do you know what I mean? Let me know your thoughts on any of these books in the comments down below. If you are interested in becoming a patron, I am working towards starting the Red Rum Book Club, which is a 6-month limited run Stephen King book club. At the end of 6 months, we'll evaluate and possibly tackle the next 6 books. I would love to do that. We'll see how people feel. It is a book club for patrons only at all tiers. It involves reading the first 6 books in Stephen King's bibliography, so Carrie, Salem's Lot, The Shining, Rage, Night Shift, and The Stand, with a live show that is patron exclusive to discuss the book at the end of each month. And it is a club that will start when I hit the goal of 50 patrons. So if you are interested in supporting this channel and getting the added bonus of some Stephen King-y goodness out of it, I know a lot of you are interested in sort of the fantastic. For me, Stephen King's horror, especially his early works, falls into the fantasy umbrella, the umbrella of the fantastic. So if you're interested in fantasy, if you're interested in Stephen King, because I know a lot of you are here because of the Dark Tower series as well, the links to the Patreon page should be on the screen right here and in the description box down below. Speaking of my patrons, thank you patrons for making videos like this and long-form content possible. I really appreciate the work that you are enabling me to do. Thank you guys so much for watching this July wrap-up, and I will hopefully see you very soon with another video.